Well, hello, BookTube. Welcome to this joint book chat. I am Peg from the History Shelf, and this is...
I am Bill from the Ruttenberg Library.
Yes, and we're finally here to talk about Robert E. Lee, A Life by Alan C. Guelzo. There's Bill's copy. We have finally made it through this book. We finished it, several weeks ago, didn't we, Bill?
Yep.
A month ago. And I think overall we gave it a thumbs up. Yeah.
I think so. I thought it was a really good, I would say a short summary of Robert E. Lee's life, and pretty down the middle. He didn't go one side or the other, and I thought it was a pretty good take.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Bill and I are both big history fans, as you know, if you subscribe to both of our channels. And if you don't subscribe to either one of our channels, you should. Subscribe to Bill's, and if you don't know me, subscribe to mine, because all we talk about is history. We do talk a lot about fiction too, and historical fiction, things we like. But maybe we should, I'll just say that I'll start off by saying my experience with Lee, like how much I know about him. So Civil War is my area of I don't want to say expertise. I know, Bill, you say that I have that, but I've just been reading about it since I was a kid. And I think you have too, though, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Probably not as much as you, because you are the expert.
Well, now you got to stop that now. The only thing I did is when I got my degree, I wrote an undergraduate thesis on the overland campaign battles between Grant and Lee. And as you can see, there's a great portrait a friend of mine made of Grant punching Lee. He's just beat. Okay. Anyway, I still have to hang that. So I've read quite a bit about Lee, and already came to this book with my own feelings about Lee. So I think that's fair to say. So, and if you just want to tell the audience, Bill, your level of exposure to Lee.
Okay. So for me, I've been reading Civil War. I really got hooked on it probably when I was in college, and it's from John Jakes's trilogy, the North and South trilogy, is probably what really got me hooked on it. And then after 2 years of teaching high school, I moved to middle school, and our big 2-month-long unit at the end of our 8th grade school year is the Civil War. And so since then, for the last 16 years now, I have really focused on the Civil War because of that. And my reading with Lee, this is actually, you would think after 16 years of doing it, that I would have read a Lee biography. And this is actually the first full-scale biography of Lee that I have read. And as I was telling you before, I think, in the bits and pieces that I had read here and there, I probably knew more than I thought I did about Lee, but this book really filled in a lot of gaps for me, or at least gave me places to jump off and do further research. And so this was a really rewarding experience for me.
Well, I agree. I think it appeals to both people with low, middle, or high exposure as far as reading goes. I've read a few different books about Lee, like one really in-depth biography that I really enjoyed, and that was Reading the Man by, I think it's Elizabeth Brown Pryor. She's a historian that died way too young in a car accident. She was amazing. She also wrote 6 Encounters with Lincoln. So she was amazing. And that Reading the Man was, wow. She really let Lee speak for himself. That to me is still my favorite biography on Lee.
Was that done through letters?
Yes, but also her analysis. She really just pulled up. She had access to a trove of letters that had recently been found. So it was an amazingly intimate portrait of the man, and to me, I think really got to the heart of him. So that one is still one of my favorites. But I think Guelzo, and we both love Alan Guelzo, his Civil War histories. Gettysburg, which is a book I want to get to this summer or early fall as well, because I've read a million books on Gettysburg, but everyone highly ranks that one. The bibliography in this is outstanding. If you want ideas for further reading, just check out Guelzo's bibliography. This thing is...
Oh, it's massive. It's very, very impressive. All of the scholarship he did for this.
Wow.
And like you said, if you've ever read any of Guelzo's stuff, it's always like that. I've read a few other books by Guelzo, and I've also listened to his Great Courses class on Lincoln.
Yes.
Absolutely great class to listen
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
And he just does very thorough research. I really enjoy. I would love to sit in his classroom. Is really what I would love to do.
No, me and you both, for sure. Um, so yeah, this book I think is going to be a great, if you're interested, I think I can recommend it. I think Bill
Yep,
obviously
I
does.
would recommend it.
Yeah. Um, and it's nice because it's not hagiography, he's not singing hosannas, but at the same time, he's not like taking low, hits at him. And it's like you said, it's a very even keeled biography. So let me just start then. What I found interesting, I think what we're going to find as we go through this discussion is that Lee was just a man of contradictions, so many different contradictions. And and you might hear me mention it more, just more as we move through, maybe kind of chronologically through the major points in his life, his major decisions, his attitudes towards certain things, that he, uh, he's a mystery. He still is very much a mystery to me, and I think, as we talked before, Bill, that Guelzo didn't quite figure him out either. And I don't think anyone really has, you know?
No, in my readings on Lee from other books, not full scale biographies, but just other books, that is really what I got. Is you had some of them that said he was pro-slavery, some of them that said he didn't like slavery, and it's like you said, it's one of those contradictions where you don't know where he actually stood, and I don't know if Guelzo, as we go through this, I don't know if Guelzo actually comes up with a, one side or the other, where he stands on a lot of these contradictions.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the best place to start with what formed the man was his relationship with his father,
Mm-hmm.
American Revolutionary War hero, Light Horse Harry Lee. I found he calls Light Horse Harry Lee, this was on page 7, a dismal father figure. And that he was always, and I do think this is true, and I think other biographers have hit on this, that Lee was a constant perfectionist, and I think he was trying to find redemption through perfection, and a lot of times trying to perfect the past that his father, well, maybe we should give the audience a little heads up on, or a background on Light Horse Harry Lee. And I don't know if you have any notes ready on that one, but he was a hero. He worked closely with Washington. He was in the cavalry, I believe.
Yeah, I made note. He was. If you look at early American history and the major events, he was there for almost all of them in one way, shape, or form. He was there constantly through all of them. I made a definite note of that. And the other really big thing that I took from Harry Lee was his debts. That man was terrible with money.
Yes.
That was a big point to be made throughout the entire book.
Mm-hmm. And that had an immediate impact, on a tangible impact on the rest of Robert E. Lee's life, because throughout the biography, Guelzo talks about how he's always writing home, is in the midst of trying to either fight a war in Mexico, or as the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, writing back home to Mary or whomever, just writing off letters about managing his accounts. He wants to make sure bills are paid on time. He does not want to emulate at all or be, associated with the legacy of his father, who basically, he just kind of went bankrupt and then abandoned the family, went to the West Indies or something, right?
Yeah, and it seemed like there was a couple of times where he had a chance to redeem himself and still fell flat. And he just, and then ran away from everything. That was to me kind of sad, not owning up to some of the stuff. And it left a huge load for Robert E. Lee. It was like you said, an embarrassment to him. He did not want to repeat history, and he did every single thing he could do to not repeat it.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about the impact just psychologically on a child when a parent just abandons you. And at 7, what was he, like 7 years old? I mean, or 10, or he became the man of the house.
Yeah, he was young.
He was very young. And so I think really, you know, a psychologist could really maybe give some answers about the decisions he made later in life. It's just because he had that lack of a father figure. And, you know, but a lot of people can, you know, not have a father figure, but, you know, make the right decisions, you know, what we would deem the right decisions. But I think with Lee, he was constantly trying to be perfect at everything. You know, he wasn't taught that it's okay to fail, that you can learn from failures and become a stronger man or person because of it.
Well, and really in the state that his father left him, he didn't have room for error. That to me becomes, you know, he doesn't have the wiggle room to learn from the failures, because they've already failed so far that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's just not good.
That's right. And then he had an ailing mother, and he did have siblings. That we learn a lot about the siblings, which I found interesting. It's like Carter, and then a brother Smith, Lee. They had all served at one point. The two brothers, I think, had served, or at least one of them was also in the United States military before the Civil War came, but he also defected, or, you know, went to the South. But yeah, I think that's where we would begin, is just, you know, he does spend some time on Light Horse Harry Lee. He doesn't go into it in too much depth. I think there was another book we had talked about on our Voxer chat, though, Bill, that we want to read just to get some more information about Harry Lee. It's called Light Horse Harry Lee, and I'm trying to remember the name of the horn. I think might have written it.
If you give me a second, I have that.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I won't find
it. and so we start off with Guelzo saying the key to understanding the, quote, marble man, right? Or the marble model is what people called him, especially at West Point, was that pursuit of redemptive perfection. And he made an interesting observation about Lee that I had never considered before. He said that Lee was a clear thinker, but not a profound one. Didn't you find that interesting, Bill? I was like, interesting. Okay, that's kind of a
it made me chuckle a little bit.
Backhanded compliment. I don't know. He said here, his thinking oscillated within the poles of perfection, independence, and security. So throughout the book, Guelzo comes back to those three themes that I over and over, especially independence, right? He was always wanting to be free of all of his obligations, his burdens, he just wanted to be independent, but he still wanted security. Yeah.
And, you know, I actually related to that a lot, because I have a lot of friends who have opened up second businesses aside from teaching. They've got second businesses. They got, during the summer, they have a whole business that goes, and they have a lot more economic independence than what I do. And I feel when I was reading that, I chuckled, because I was actually picturing myself, because I would love to have that economic independence, but I also don't want to go out on a limb, and maybe I don't have the brain to go out on a limb and take off on that second journey. And I kind of related that. I found a lot in common as far as that. I'm all right at teaching, but if I start to stray off the path, I'm in trouble. And I felt like Robert E. Lee was in that same situation, and he didn't want to gamble. He didn't want to take a chance, because then he might lose what he's got. And that was really a big one that I took from that.
Right. And I think most of us could relate to that. You know, he had worked so hard to keep the, food on the table for everybody, and to keep the family somewhat together, even though they were being kind of shuttled around to, extended relations around Virginia. They moved a lot. But it was really when he decided to join the military, that those two things kind of came into because you're really not independent in the military. You're you're kind of told where to go and what to do, but there's security.
Yeah, the
So
security is huge.
so I think that's what attracted him, you know.
Mhm.
But as some of you may know, before the Civil War, he was in the he
Army,
graduated from West Point, right, and became
the Army Corps of Engineers.
yeah, went into the Army Corps of Engineers. So Guelzo, he goes into a few chapters of kind of covering the different projects he was working on at the time, and he had to move around a lot to oversee a lot of different projects. So he had met Mary Custis, or Mary Custis, who became his wife. She was the daughter of George Washington Custis, who was this is where it gets all tangled, because so you're the George Washington expert, so you must know the family tree pretty well.
Was he, I'm going to ask, was he the stepson?
Yes.
So she's the step granddaughter
Of George
Washington,
Washington.
right?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's it. And so of course the big thing with Mary is that when he marries her, Arlington comes into his range of vision. But in Guelzo's book, he tells us, I'm going to see if I can find a picture of it. It's interesting because everyone kind of associates Arlington with Lee and how much he must have loved Arlington. Well, Guelzo is very straight out by saying he really didn't care. He didn't like it. It was a burden for him to try to oversee it, take care of it. He felt like it wasn't really his. It was Mary's. It was Mary's, and it was George Washington Custis. His true home that he loved, and he wished he could always go back and buy it, was Stratford Hall in Virginia's northern neck. So it's this really interesting building right here. It's interesting architecture for that day. Just that big staircase up at the top, that was his home. They weren't, after Robert, or it was Henry Lee III, and there's Light Horse Harry Lee, that's his dad, right? After he ran off, they couldn't afford to stay there.
Now, have you ever been there?
Oh, did we get sorry. No, I have not.
Okay, because I've got to go to Arlington before, but I had never got to go to Stratford Hall.
Okay.
So I didn't know if you'd been able to do that.
No, I have not. Sorry, I just got a message saying that it says my meeting time is going to run out, but I doubt it, but it might. And if so, we'll do it again. I'll splice it together. No problem.
Yep, we'll figure it out.
This has never happened on a Zoom call. Anyway, I haven't been, but I've flown over Arlington, as I've come into Washington, D.C. a couple times, but I haven't had a chance to actually visit Arlington either. But from what they say, and his description of Arlington, it was kind of, it's not all that in a bag of chips. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of, actually kind of crowded on the inside, and it wasn't real marble. It was like it was wood covered with like a plaster, and so it just seems kind of shabby in a sense. So but Mary and her daughter, and so when they started having children, Mary and the daughters loved Arlington. It was always about Arlington. And Lee was just like, could you give me a break with this? But anyway, so he's in the military, and then he heads off to Mexican War when that happens. But I guess we should talk about at this time, maybe let's talk about what we gathered from Guelzo's perception of Lee and what his thoughts were, Lee's thoughts were on slavery. Obviously, Mary Lee owned slaves. I think Lee and his mother, I think they had like Black servants, but I'm not sure how many slaves they owned before he even moved to Arlington and married Mary. But with Lee, we obviously know that he was a man of his time and place. And I don't think he really saw African-American people as real people. Well, you know what I'm trying to say. He didn't see them as on a par with white people. So he was a racist for sure.
Oh, big time.
Yeah, big time racist. And I think he was rather indifferent. That's the message I'm getting from Guelzo's take, is that he was indifferent.
I agree. And he said that he said that several times. He used that. Matter of fact, he used those, I think, exact words, didn't he?
Mhm.
About just being indifferent, and it's like he didn't want to make an outward stand one way or the other, but you could tell by his actions where he stood.
That's right.
That's
He would,
kind of how I took it.
yes, he would give lip service sometimes, saying, well, of course slavery is not a good thing, and but I think he was one of those ones who said it'll get taken care of eventually,
Yeah.
as long as it didn't impact him and his accounts and his you know, how much money he had in the purse, as long as it wasn't going to adversely impact. Oh, and of course, I don't think he ever wanted equality. You know, he never foresaw or, you know, agree. And as we get later on into the discussion, you know, after the Civil War, as a private citizen, you know, he didn't think that African American people should be citizens, should vote.
Well, yeah, and when he later in the book towards the end, when he talks about when he's putting together is it Washington College, right?
Yeah.
Becomes Washington and Lee. That was one of the big things that he didn't allow African Americans in.
That's right.
Right. If I remember right, he
is
did
correct.
not, and
Yep.
he only allowed very few Yankees in, and
Yes.
so his his indifference stretched to many different areas.
Yes. Yes. And I think the most unsettling portrait of that was when he covers the episode where there were a couple of runaway slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And he had hired someone to bring them back. They weren't able to, and or no, I think they brought them back, and he wanted them to chastise them pretty.
He sold them south. And aren't those the two he sold south?
I think so, but well, that might have been. But before that, though, there was physical violence done.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And I think the overseer didn't want to do it, or someone did not want to do it, and he actually did it himself.
Yeah.
Like with the whip. And I was like, okay, that's really kind of what all you need to know.
Yep.
About Robert E. Lee.
You can pay lip service one way, but if your actions are taking you another, that's
yes,
a big story.
Yes. And, you know, he didn't, from what Guelzo could find after that incident, and then this kind of moves into his feelings about Native Americans as well. We'll go into that. After the beating or the corporal physical punishment, of the escaped or the runaway slaves, he didn't really spend too much time on it. There was like no moral. It didn't seem like there was any type of moral reckoning with himself. He just kind of just glossed over it.
Mm-hmm.
Just something that had to be done, to settle accounts or something like that. So that was unfortunate and unpleasant. And, it does not.
Well, and that's where I think a lot of biographers take the story and the only reason he was for slavery is because he had to in the will, and then he would let them free. Isn't that where a lot of them go?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's totally, I think he was pretty worried about that debt.
Yes, he was worried about that debt. That's the other thing too, that so what we're talking about here for the viewer is when George Washington Custis passed in his will, he made Robert Lee. It's so funny.
Short end of the stick on this.
He did, because he didn't give him anything. And he says, but I want you to oversee everyone else getting everything. Like you have to be you have to be
anything, but you're the executor.
He had to do all the work. And he wanted all his grandkids, so Lee's own children, to get like certain shares of this. This person gets this house over here on this river. This person gets this, but you've got to settle all this, and you've got to free my slaves within 5 years or whatever. So he's just trying to do all this because it's duty, and I've got to be as good as my word. I've got to be better than my dad, right? I've got to make sure that I can live up to these ideals.
Well, I feel bad for Robert E. Lee in this respect, where, I don't trust you enough to give you anything, but yet I trust you to be the executor, to make sure everybody else gets their stuff. I feel really bad because I'll be honest, I don't know if I'm big enough a man to do that. I might have to say, nah, that's okay.
I know. I know. And he was dealing with it for years, all the way up until the Civil War. And then obviously Arlington was just seized, taken by the Federals. And so at that point it was a moot, question. And the existing slaves on the Arlington plantation, had already left on their own. They're like, bye, we're out of here.
Yep.
But so I think the other thing that we could see here throughout the book is when he goes out west on his different projects. Before the Mexican War, he was also in Texas, covering a couple of things, like either overseeing forget why they sent him to Texas,
Wasn't
but
there Indian fighting going on or
there's
something?
Indian fighting. But as a Corps of Engineer, what was he doing? He was just kind of building the.
He was building a fort out there, wasn't he? Was it?
There was a lot in this book, folks. So
Is there something like Galveston?
yeah, and they talk about his Camp Cooper, I think was the name of it. I think I've got the. He was with the 2nd Cavalry, and he had to organize it. And I think that's where he met Albert Sidney Johnston.
Oh yeah. Well, and then when he was out there, that's at the same time. That was the same time that everybody's leaving.
Yeah.
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 Everybody's leaving the Union, and he's supposed to, stick with the Union and keep everybody in line, but yet they're all going bye-bye.
Yeah.
And that was probably a tough situation to be in, I imagine.
Yep. And it says here, I think I'm on around page 141, Bill, if you want to look up his time with the Comanche there. You can see that he definitely held racist views of both, African Americans and Native Americans. So he was put off by the paint and ornaments that made the Comanche, quote, more hideous than nature made them, and the whole race extremely uninteresting, end quote. That's on 100.